Right now, somewhere in your life, there is a question you are not asking. Maybe it is at work. Maybe it is at home. Maybe it is something everyone around you seems to believe and you just go along with it. You tell yourself it is not worth the trouble. But 2,400 years ago, a man asked the questions you are avoiding. And it got him killed. His name was Socrates. And the real story of his death is far stranger than the one you were taught in school. You probably know the basic outline. Athens. A trial. A cup of poison. A philosopher who calmly accepted his fate because he believed in something greater than himself. That version is comforting. It makes his death feel noble, distant, almost peaceful. The real version is messier, and it says something uncomfortable about how your own mind works today. Let's start with who Socrates actually was. Not a teacher in a quiet classroom. Not a man with a tidy philosophy written down in books. Socrates never wrote a single word that survived. Everything you know about him comes from his students, mainly Plato, who recorded his conversations decades later. So what did Socrates actually do all day? He walked through the marketplace of Athens. He stopped people, and he asked them questions. Simple questions at first. What is courage? What is justice? What does it mean to live a good life? But Socrates had a method. He would let someone answer confidently. Then he would ask a follow-up. Then another. Slowly, the person's confident answer would fall apart in front of a crowd. This method has a name now. Historians call it the Socratic method. But to the people living through it in real time, it did not feel like a teaching tool. It felt like public humiliation. Imagine you are a respected general in Athens. You believe you understand courage. You have lived it on the battlefield. Then a barefoot, oddly dressed man with no military rank starts asking you to define it. And within 10 minutes, in front of your peers, your own definition contradicts itself. How would that feel? Now imagine that happening over and over, for decades, to generals, politicians, poets, and priests. Not once, constantly. This is the part the simple version of the story leaves out. Socrates was not killed for being mysterious or strange. He was killed because he made powerful people look foolish, in public, repeatedly, for most of his adult life. By the time Athens put him on trial in 399 BCE, the city had just lost a brutal war against Sparta. It had briefly fallen under a violent dictatorship known as the 30 Tyrants. Several of Socrates' former associates had been involved with that regime. Athens was frightened, embarrassed, and looking for someone to blame. Socrates was charged with 2 crimes: corrupting the youth, and impiety, meaning disrespect toward the gods of the city. But here is the detail most people never learn. The philosopher and historian I.F. Stone, who spent the final years of his life investigating this trial, argued that the religious charge was largely a cover. The real offense, according to Stone's research, was political. Socrates had spent his life teaching young aristocrats to question authority, tradition, and democracy itself. In a city desperate to rebuild trust in its institutions, that kind of questioning looked like a threat. You were not there. But you have felt a smaller version of this same pressure. Think about the last time you disagreed with a group decision and chose to stay quiet instead. In the 1950s, a psychologist named Solomon Asch ran a now famous experiment. He put people in a room with several others and asked simple questions like which of 3 lines matched a reference line in length. The answer was obvious, but the other people in the room were actors, instructed to confidently give the wrong answer. Again and again, real participants abandoned the obvious truth in front of their own eyes just to match the group. Not because they were stupid, because disagreement felt dangerous. That is the same pressure that filled the courtroom in Athens. At his trial, Socrates was given the chance to defend himself, and he could have. He could have apologized. He could have promised to stop asking questions in public. The jury, made up of 500 Athenian citizens, likely would have accepted a quieter, more humble version of him. Instead, Socrates told them that he would rather die than stop philosophizing. He said that an unexamined life was not worth living. The jury voted to convict him. But here's the twist almost nobody talks about. Under Athenian law, Socrates had one more option. He could propose his own alternative punishment, such as exile or a fine, and the jury would vote between that and the death penalty. His friends begged him to propose exile. He had the wealth and connections to live out his life comfortably in another city. He refused. Why would a man choose death over a peaceful life somewhere else, just to keep asking questions? This is where the story stops being ancient history and starts being a mirror. In 1963, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram ran an experiment at Yale that still unsettles people today. He told participants they were helping with a memory test and that they had to deliver increasingly painful electric shocks to another person whenever that person answered incorrectly. The shocks were not real, but the participants believed they were. Milgram found that a striking majority of ordinary people kept administering what they believed were dangerous, even potentially lethal shocks, simply because a calm authority figure in a lab coat told them to continue. Not because they were cruel, because authority is powerful and questioning it feels almost physically uncomfortable. Socrates spent his entire life doing the opposite of what Milgram's participants did. He questioned every authority figure he met regardless of the social cost, and Athens executed him for it. On the day of his death, Socrates was calm. According to Plato's account, he spent his final hours discussing the nature of the soul with his closest students, almost as if death were simply another question worth examining. Then he drank the hemlock. His body slowly went numb, starting at his feet and moving upward until the poison reached his heart. His final recorded words were not about justice, or Athens, or his trial. They were a small, almost ordinary request about a debt he owed. Calm, specific, unbothered. Why does that matter to you, sitting here, almost 25 centuries later? Because every single day, you face a smaller version of his choice. Speak up and risk looking foolish, or being disliked, or standing out from the group. Or stay quiet, agree with the room, and protect your comfort. The political scientist Cass Sunstein has spent years studying what he calls group polarization, the tendency for people inside like-minded groups to silence doubts and drift toward more extreme, less examined positions. His research suggests that most groups do not become foolish because their members are foolish. They become foolish because the few people who notice the flaws choose silence over friction. Socrates refused that silence, even when it cost him everything. You do not have to drink hemlock to learn his lesson. You just have to notice the moment, today, when staying quiet feels easier than asking the question. He was executed for asking questions. The real question is what you are willing to risk for asking yours.